Awesome. Thanks, everybody, for being here. And I'm excited to be joined by the team over at AWS to talk about, I think, what's largely one of the most important topics in, well, security altogether, but most definitely in the realm of cloud security. And so what we want to discuss today is really how to build a comprehensive data security strategy in AWS using a wide and sort of vast variety of both cloud-native tooling as well as some of the other types of maybe different or third-party approaches that you might choose to take. Because I will say, over the past couple of years, having been in the realm of cloud security, this is an area particularly categorically that's gotten extraordinarily robust. There's actually so many different options available that really encompass, I'd say, just about every facet of data security you could imagine. It's a cool area to be talking about today. It's definitely getting more mature all the time. And for organizations that are concerned about the safety and security of their data being put out into the cloud, I think there's a lot of options for it. So again, I'm excited to be joined by David, and let's go ahead and get things rolling without further ado. So just to kick us off, and this sort of introductory slide is really geared from my own experience being one of the participants in the CSA Top Threats Working Group. So we've been, as a group, collectively going out and asking the community for a really long time, what are your biggest concerns? What are the things that you guys are the most worried about? And have you seen any of that course come to fruition? And we've talked about that at SANS, and we've been certainly running our own cloud surveys and just, of course, trying to find out not only, of course, what people are worried about, but what people are doing about it and whether they're really seeing any issues. And as I'm probably sure you guys know, and maybe this isn't a surprise to anyone, the number one concern in cloud is definitely data breaches. People are just worried about their data being breached. And I would say that this is a place that, you're seeing, probably the same exact concerns coming across, from people dealing with this in their own organization. So this is internal just as much as it is cloud. So we've got to protect our sensitive data pretty much everywhere. But I feel just, sort of over the years, people have been more concerned putting things into the cloud because, well, they probably weren't aware of just how many options they had to be able to protect that. So we have tons of stuff, as I said. The maturity around this is definitely growing all the time. We're seeing lots of, cool solutions emerge. And certainly I would say today that some of these are even easier to use, probably much easier to use in some cases, than things that people have traditionally tried to do on premise. That's a good thing for us because we are seeing a significant shift to people feeling comfortable, maybe, let's call it the executives and the business decision makers in organizations, the key stakeholders in these businesses and organizations moving sensitive data out. And this is just a quick snapshot of some of the details that we brought back from our last survey at SANS, which we just published several weeks ago. And sure enough, it's pretty much everything you can imagine, ranging from business intelligence to financial business records and everything in between. And because of that, and obviously there are regulatory concerns and compliance needs that go along with this, we've definitely got to figure out how to properly secure that data. We've also got privacy regulations that are rapidly escalating and sort of driving organizations not only towards the use of cloud, but I'd say most definitely, sort of making people view, large cloud providers like AWS and say, hey, we need a global presence in the cloud. We need to be able to do something about specific, geographic locations and keep things where we want that. And then obviously, of course, put very specific types of protection in place. So GDPR sort of got this whole train rolling, but now you've got things like CCPA emerging, and that's only going to escalate. I think we all know that in the security field. We're seeing more privacy focus coming from that consumer orientation. So let's start off with some of the key things that I think all organizations are probably focused on. And some of this really is sort of the bigger picture, the larger scale governance model and governance requirements or policy requirements that we've all had forever. As I always joke with many of my, sort of students in class and even with clients as a consultant, everybody's got a data classification policy. No doubt about it. All organizations have got this stuff documented in the, sort of classic, stereotypical three-ring binder somewhere. But actually putting that to practice has been extraordinarily difficult, and especially as you get to a point where you've got huge, sort of spread of data across different databases and data stores and systems, and you've got various applications acting upon that data. It really becomes a bigger and bigger struggle to quantify and sort of classify that data in various places. So this is one of the cool things that I do see starting to emerge in cloud, and of course in AWS. For those of you that might not be familiar with this, there's a service called Amazon Macie that just is an enormous data engine and uses things like machine learning to basically process specific patterns and classification and categorizations of the data that's stored in the environment, and then allows you to build a model around that. And I think that's what it comes down to, especially at scale. AWS has a lot of scale. In fact, they've got more scale than probably any of us will ever even hope to have, and they're putting that to use to take that, data that's stored there and sort of process it in such a way that you can build policies around that and build some alerting models to know who's accessing what kinds of things are actually being done to the data, with the data, when it was accessed. So, at least from a tracking standpoint, and the ability to model my data in ways that, is trackable, that's huge. Of course, for any security professionals, that's just the starting point. I mean, it's great to be able to track data and categorize it and sort of see what's going on. But at the heart of it, too, we've got a need to really be able to report on all that access and control, ideally, what's going on around that data. So, of course, Amazon Macie can now also integrate with things like CloudWatch and the newer service from AWS called Security Hub, which really does sort of bring that bigger picture view that can also integrate a number of additional third-party tools that you guys may already be using. And that brings us sort of outside the spectrum of today's discussion, because that, obviously ties into things like security event management and reporting and security operations, which is critical. And certainly I'd say, monitoring and controlling that data, access and seeing what's going on with it is critical. But we need tools that can funnel that information to us at scale, and that's exactly what Amazon Macie is capable of doing. So anytime I find tools that are capable of helping us with this problem, the data classification issue, it's exciting because we really have struggled with that for so long. It just has not been an easy thing to put into practice, and we may now actually really have an option or a possible solution to start getting there. The next place that most of us, I think, would logically go in the realm of data security is going to be encryption. In fact, that's the first thing many people think of when they start having discussions around data security. And I'm sure many of you out there that have been in the security industry for any length of time have sort of heard this occasional concept bubble up of, let's just encrypt everything, what would be the harm? And the fact that we've sort of been discussing this idea of encryption conceptually for everything for years and years, and that's been really a big struggle. Well, today I think we actually have more options to pull that off than ever before. So obviously, if you take a look at what's here and we talk about the pros and cons of that, we've got file and folder encryption, which we've classically looked at. We've got full disk encryption that has conceptually been something we've done for, endpoints and laptops and so forth. We've got specialized encryption in different places. We've got some of the cloud-native storage encryption options. All of these have their own benefits and drawbacks, depending on what it is you're trying to do. So what we're going to talk about briefly is just, obviously the different types of encryption and what that represents in cloud-based architectures and implementations. And obviously Amazon has been on this, sort of trek to enable encryption wherever possible for a really long time. So this is not new. And what we've seen is that, as more people clamor to put that sensitive data into the cloud, there's more options available. But this one that we're looking at right now, this concept of the connectivity aspect of encryption, so things like a point-to-point IPsec tunnel, that's been around for years. So we've had some need as we create hybrid architectures to facilitate connectivity between our premises and the AWS environment that we're connecting into. And so what Amazon, of course, has done is create an object type. So call this a specific gateway software object called a VPG, or a virtual private gateway, that we can facilitate that connectivity to within the virtual private cloud environments for customers. And so obviously there's a lot of variations of this, and we won't go too far down that rabbit hole. So if you're connecting to a traditional on-premise type of scenario, or if you're using a sort of transit model of VPC connectivity or gateways, there are a number of different places that you could sort of hitch that IPsec tunnel to, but creating sound standards-based IPsec connectivity is definitely something that many organizations have a keen interest in. And even if you decide to create a dedicated, sort of tunnel with something like Direct Connect, which gives you guaranteed bandwidth, and for a lot of organizations just makes a ton of sense because it allows you to genuinely enable a true hybrid architecture, you might still be able to implement an IPsec tunnel within that if you've got, say, a regulatory requirement for encryption. So the biggest piece really of data security around encryption, however, probably comes back to enablement of key management and tying things like encryption keys and the use of encryption keys into all the various storage locations that you have enabled. And so for years now, I know this has been sort of a raging debate in the security community around cloud encryption and how the heck are we going to make this work and what does it look like and where's this information and so forth. Well, I'm happy to say that really you talk about stability and ideally really ease of implementation around a cryptographic implementation. The AWS KMS service is about as good as it gets. And this is a very robust key storage service that also allows for things like lifecycle management and is, well, really functionally enabled within pretty much all the major storage types you would want to use in your AWS environment. And I think that's actually a very important thing to note because if it's difficult, it's going to be something that is viewed as a burden or sort of way too much operational overhead. But comparatively, having some significant experience in my own background, and I'm sure many of you do as well, with trying to put a PKI solution or key management solution in place across a large organization, this is not some sort of light lifting. This is something that's really been a struggle, especially to integrate into your storage area network and your database environments and your file shares and all of the other various places we've got sensitive data. KMS is tied into everything, and it, of course, allows you to bring your own keys. So if you want to upload your own keys where the cryptographic material was generated on-premise first, well, you've got that ability. And so the thing that, of course, people are always concerned with is, well, how secure is it within the AWS environment? I can tell you it's been audited. I've read through a lot of the AWS audit documents, and I'm sure you guys have too. I think I've seen more details around KMS and what's behind that and how it's managed and so on than just about anything else. And it's also been validated for use with PCI DSS applications and processing, which tells you there's a lot of external scrutiny on this. And I'm not saying that that's good enough for you. You'll have to make up your own mind on that. But, this is a pretty safe service that's had a lot of investment around security and auditing and monitoring. And if you really need your own sort of, FIPS accredited, tamper-proof appliance, and many of us, especially in the financial industry and some others, have a need for that. You've got to have that to meet your own regulatory needs. Well, this is an HSM service, Cloud HSM, that you can provision as well. And so obviously that can integrate with KMS as well. All these things go together as a cohesive ecosystem that facilitate strong encryption in your cloud environment. So this is the good news. I think in some ways enabling encryption in the cloud has actually gotten a lot easier. So this is good for all of us. Now DLP has traditionally been tough. And I think DLP means different things to different people because there's DLP in transit, there's DLP around, databases specifically, there's DLP at the client level. I mean, I think an all-encompassing DLP strategy is necessarily going to have to probably use some third-party tooling just to be able to cover everything that we want to cover or potentially need to cover. But you do have the ability with Macie to reasonably track that data as it's being accessed and potentially used in your cloud environment. And that's pretty important, especially at scale. So if you've got a bunch of data and you have adequately tagged it and categorized it as you need to, then you've got some insight into usage patterns. And you can, of course, build alerting workflows and everything that we talked about previously around that. So I'd say most certainly you can do some DLP-like functions, even with cloud-native tools, and services that are out there today in AWS. The other thing about data security, of course, has to come back to lifecycle. And there's a lot of different elements that go along with this. And when I teach classes on cloud security, I probably spend too much time on this because I'm just really concerned with making sure we cover all those bases, right? Because you can see there's a lot in the data lifecycle, all the way from the generation of the data, around through the use of the data, the archival of the data, and then invariably the destruction of the data. And in the cloud, I think people feel like they maybe have limited touch access to some of this or what have you, but the reality is you can control pretty much every aspect of the data lifecycle as needed in the cloud. You might just have to modify some of your processes and a bit of the oversight that you've traditionally had around certain parts of it. So I look at this and say, all right, generation of data, that's more governance. The use of data, that's partially, a factor of the shared responsibility model. So you're using data, you're transferring data, you're potentially transforming your data. Those three pieces really come back to, how you guys are relying on the cloud provider to maintain the infrastructure. And they have lots of details about how they do that. Because obviously, if, your cloud providers couldn't, tell you, in all honesty, that they were doing everything under their power to keep the environment safe from outside attacks, that would shed some doubt on things. But AWS has a lot of details about all the security measures they have and that they're responsible for. So as long as you're building your own controls around monitoring the use of your data, setting up IPsec tunnels and things for transfer of data, modifying the data, that's of course more of an application scenario. And then as we just talked about in terms of encryption and some of the other features, storing your data, choosing to archive it as needed. And then when it comes to destruction, it's a matter of saying, well, can I get my data actually out of AWS? And the answer is, of course you can. So you can get your data out of AWS in a bunch of different ways, very much dependent on how much there is and where it's stored. But you can also basically ship it to yourself by using either the Snowball or Snowmobile services. And of course, if you're using the Snowmobile service, you're probably a very heavy user of AWS and have an extraordinarily large amount of data that needs to be sent back to you. But for some organizations, that's exactly what's needed. You need that assurance that physically I can recover that data and have it sent back to my premises environment for whatever reason that might be. So again, if you have a need to specifically, just take it and import it somewhere, or if some of the data just needs to be moved, again, you have a lot of varieties of options, but you can definitely control your data throughout its entire life cycle. Some of the different control changes that just go along, I'd say generally with data security in AWS, you need to be cognizant of your SLAs and things like availability and resiliency guarantees. That's part of that shared responsibility strategy, but it's also very much a part of just, contract arrangements and making sure that going into agreements, you know exactly what you're doing. Make sure you're setting up secure transport of data anywhere you have critical data paths that need that. And of course, anything that you would probably do yourself on premises, you can largely build and do in the cloud as well. Today, I tend to find that most organizations use a balance of the cloud native and third-party types of tools to encompass the full spectrum of data security, but nobody just completely refuses to use some of the cloud native. So that's a big change in the past several years where people have really gained a comfort level with some of the built-in tools, built-in services, built-in control capabilities, and of course being able to bring your own key and apply some of those different key management services has helped tremendously with this. I'm just going to give you guys a couple quick examples above and beyond some of the other things we've already talked about. And really these are just serving to illustrate the incredible breadth of capabilities that are continuously being added into AWS services. S3 is a great example. In fact, this is one of the things I sort of have, let's say informally, I've informally been tracking the additions that continuously come out to some of the storage services in AWS. And there was a period of time over the past, I don't know, call it 18, 24 months, where I think it was every other month, the folks at AWS were adding something that had a tie to S3 security. And the list of things you can do there now is extremely long. So you can set policies around, identity management and access, which of course is more governing not only users accessing things, but also other services that are able to authenticate and gain access to specific data. You've got policies that you can apply just directly to a bucket. You've also got access control lists that you can apply directly to buckets and data. You can apply what's known as query string authentication for application-type access into elements of S3. And you've got an extraordinary amount of logging that can be enabled and then ties, of course, back into that event management strategy that I alluded to. This is all, of course, additional things that go above and beyond the encryption capabilities, which are extensive. So you've got a lot there. For those of you that are more focused on things like databases, you've got encryption there, of course. So we've got lots of different capabilities around encryption, key management, things we just mentioned. But you've also got access controls in the form of security groups, which are stateful types of firewall rules that can be enabled. And one of the things I've always touted around this, now granted this is a little bit more, call it network level functionality, but it's network access to your databases and your data. And, thank goodness these actually start in a default deny posture. So, something we've been talking about for decades has come to fruition. You can only, add policies and add rules to allow that. You can also set up things like IAM permissions here around any of the specific operations that users can call as part of, let's say application type processes and queries coming in. So lots of stuff. You've got a lot of different controls that are available to you. And, really what it comes down to is making sure as, organizations, we make ourselves aware of this. And in fact, this is something that I'm not going to call it a soapbox. I don't feel too soapboxy about this, but I often find that security professionals haven't been sort of wholly aligned with data teams and data storage teams, and that even goes back to on-premise. We know about encryption. I mean, obviously that's part of what we have to focus on and access controls to data, but not necessarily really delving into the number of tools and processes and capabilities that we can leverage within cloud environments themselves. So I do think it's getting easier to secure our data than ever. That doesn't mean that it's going to automatically happen for us. In many cases, we've still got to go in and enable those types of controls and configure them appropriately for our own environments. But, at the end of the day, tracking some of the sensitive data is possible. Setting up encryption is definitely possible. We've got an enormous number of tools at our disposal. And this is just a handful of additional resources that some of you guys might find interesting if you're starting to explore this, between SANS, of course, and a lot of the things that AWS publishes and makes available to help with their customers setting up controls for data security and, well, really pretty much everything else. So thanks so much for listening. And with that, I'm going to hand it over off to David.
Awesome. Thanks, David. So let's get started with, let's make sure I can change the slides. Hey, there we go. Oh, now it's gone too fast. There's a lag. Sorry about that. So let's start with talking about one of the kind of most important things to start looking at, which is around the people perspective of this. I'm just going to try and get back onto, I don't know, Matt, if you can help me out here and get me back to the first slide. There seems to be a bit of a lag here. Sorry about that, people. There we are. Cool. Awesome. So so let's start with the people's perspective on this, starting with our native AWS services, and then we'll bring in some partners and some customer stories into this. But the first thing is around identity and access, right? Who has access to the data or the systems processing the data? What can they do with that data? Can they elevate privileges to get more access to the data? What is a normal access pattern? Has a misconfiguration introduced an attack vector? Stephen Schmidt, our CISO, said the number one thing I worry about is humans. It's almost always a person who does something to make a problem come to life. And I think this is so true in many cases. In fact, the recent Gartner quote was 80% of future cloud breaches will be due to customer misconfiguration, mismanaged credentials, or insider theft. So managing the people, managing access to these services is paramount. So to help with that, we've got our own IAM, or Identity and Access Management System, which allows you to manage those users groups, provide access to AWS services and resources, and we're going to talk a little bit more about this in a few minutes. Some of the other services that you need to pay attention to in this space are things like AWS Config, which you can use to track changes in your AWS environment. You've got AWS Config rules that you can use to detect potential issues, such as maybe an S3 bucket with a public access policy, for example. You've got tools, as Dave mentioned, Amazon Macy, which uses machine learning to go find all the data, classify it, so what's PII, what's credit card data, what's user information, and provide visibility and alerts based upon unauthorized access and potential data leaks. Every service that you see here probably has some role to play, whether it's VPC flow logs to analyze network traffic, or KMS to encrypt data, as Dave talked about there. There is a new service which I encourage you to take a look at. It's called AWS Security Hub, and it gives you a single pane of glass view across many of these services, including partner offerings, which we'll get to in a little bit. Now, the first thing I want to dig into a little bit is around access control. And this is usually the first kind of set of conversations we're having with customers around, permissions, groups and roles, how we're tying back to on-premises, corporate directories, how you manage access, not only for humans, but also code too. There's a lot of AWS services and applications that can use their own identity to access resources. You've got a very fine-grained control over, what you can do from, granting permissions to users or groups for full access, or maybe read-only permissions for those that just need to get into logs and do some analysis. MFA is important. To meet some of your compliance requirements, you might enable MFA to specific commands, such as deleting objects from S3. You also have advanced controls such as permission boundaries. And what permission boundaries do is they basically allow you to set up a way of preventing users from granting more permissions than they had originally. So if you're giving someone access to admin within an account, you can actually block them from turning off like CloudTrail as an example. So we talked a little bit about Security Hub as being that single pane of glass, and what it's designed to do is bring in information from a whole bunch of different services and endpoints. So information from your firewalls, from your endpoint protection tools, vulnerability scanners, things like GuardDuty, Inspector, and Macy, as well as partner solutions, as we see on the diagram here. There's a compliance view, so you can today look at how well you're doing against the CIS benchmarks, and you can go get insights into resources and accounts on the dashboard through insights. And one of the things you can do is go see from a data pane perspective, are your S3 buckets secure? Do you have logging turned on? Do you have encryption on, and that kind of thing? Now, in the example here, we've got Barracuda's Cloud Security Guardian, which can also actually generate and send data in the Security Hub. So not only does Security Hub give you this pane of glass across the AWS services, you can also integrate partner services such as Barracuda into this. And if we double click on kind of Barracuda a little bit, since we brought them up there, Cloud Security Guardian is basically a SaaS service that watches over your AWS environment. It's going to discover all the resources. It can assess configuration and compliance based on frameworks such as CIS, HIPAA, NIST, etc. And then it can watch for those configuration changes to your environment. It can generate alerts or actually provide remediation based on that. You can quarantine users or applications depending on how you configure that. Remember, some of these vulnerabilities and some of the access to data is the bad guy gets access to some other part of the system and then starts making changes in the environment to give them access. And something like Cloud Security Guardian is going to help you with that. Cloud Security Guardian can also deploy their WAF and their firewalls into the environment as a way of securing the applications and infrastructures as well. And on the diagram now, we actually have a kind of quick start solution that Barracuda's developed in conjunction with Puppet. And what it does is it basically provides a WAF module for Puppet so that developer teams can integrate the WAF directly into their DevOps pipeline. DevOps pipeline should iron my hands for that. It should of course be a DevSecOps pipeline there. So by integrating Puppet with the Barracuda WAF, what we've got is app teams can focus on applications. Barracuda WAF's going to, out of the box, protect these applications from outside threats and allow them, to integrate that as part of the application lifecycle there. So when it comes to kind of user availability, the best thing you can do is get a feel for what's going on within your environment, because sometimes you get these isolated events, and unless you're looking at the big picture, you may miss something that's important here. So again, looking at a tool like Cloud Security Guardian is going to give you that consolidated view, not only across applications, but across the data pane as well. Typical example from, user error is, security's complicated, and monkey brain can forget things. So for example, you might be working, solving a problem, doing some troubleshooting, so you open up a port to do some maintenance, you forget to close that port, and that leaves maybe SSH open to the public or something else, and thus creating a vulnerability there. So tools like this are going to help you kind of detect those things and provide alerts and warnings and even automated remediation around that. To give you a little example, Barracuda worked with a direct lending organization that we're beginning to transition from their on-premises data center to AWS. And while they're transitioning, they found that developers could spin up applications that didn't adhere to all of their compliance and security guidelines, which caused them issues, potentially data vulnerabilities, unauthorized access, and that kind of thing. Obviously, migrating a large number of applications, a bit time-consuming to go monitor all the VPCs and checking the flow logs and all that kind of thing. So they were able to plug in Cloud Security Guardian from the marketplace and basically take advantage of the auto remediation features and get a single report every day of kind of what the vulnerabilities are and what are being done about them. So pretty cool tool. Digging into the WAF a little bit, we talk about data protection, but it starts with access to the applications. And quite often we think about incoming requests and attack vectors and that kind of thing, but we also should think about data leakage as well. So one of the cool things Barracuda WAFs can do is bring in the DLP to that kind of function, if you like. So not only preventing OWASP top 10, but also looking at, are my credit card numbers leaking, are my social security numbers leaking, and that kind of thing. And then finally, we've got to think about using more intelligence around preventing access to data and protecting applications. As David said, that there's more probably sensitive data in the cloud today than ever before. And if you think about it, it's not just IPs that we want to protect from. If we can go tap into some of the other data sources like Active Directory for users and who should have permissions to what, you can actually build a more secure system using that extra information about users there. And particularly when organizations are moving from an on-premises environment to cloud, it's really good to be able to go extend your existing infrastructure into that cloud as well. So something to keep in mind when you're kind of looking at third-party vendors, you probably already have some that you're familiar with and using, and perhaps the first stop should be, do they provide what I need in AWS? And a quick way, just to Dave's tip here, a quick way of doing that is to go see if they have an offering in Marketplace, because if they do, they probably have built something that works very well with AWS. They probably meet the competency for that particular product space as well. So let's get on and talk about a couple of customer stories here. So the first one I want to talk about is Club Automation, which is a fairly newish company. They're in the healthcare software industry space based in Chicago. And originally they'd built out their application on-premises data centers. And they wanted to move to AWS because they were basically getting challenges of scaling up to handle all the new customers that were getting there. So they moved to AWS using EC2 and Beanstalk, but their application stores not only customer data but also payment information as well. So there's some PCI in there, there's some PII in there, and they wanted to make sure they could address all of their security and compliance obligations. So Club Automation chose to work with Barracuda. They deployed their next-gen firewalls to help secure the company's AWS environment. They're installed in all of their VPCs, and the firewall sits in a public subnet which kind of sits between the outside world and their applications, and in particular between the cardholder data environment. One of the things the IT team managed to do is basically, when they first started building out the application and the software, they'd look at cloud solutions and look at cloud offerings. And I think David mentioned this, a lot of people's views are based on several years old capabilities of not only the cloud, but also software vendors' ability to protect assets in there. And things have moved a long way since those early days. So, when they look back at AWS and in particular Barracuda as well, they found they were quite surprised and were able to move their workloads across and heading towards a full production environment running on AWS now. The next one I want to talk about, and moving off a little bit off Barracuda now, is Snapper, which is based in New Zealand. They basically handle student public transport ticketing, amongst other things. And the challenge they had was around, how do we protect the students' data and the transport data and their travel schedules and all that kind of thing. So they had to create a system to process all of these specific concessions for the student while making sure the student was qualified and securing all of the transactions. So there's students' personal data, there's travel data in there, and there's data associated with each purchase as well. So Snapper solved this by basically using Symantec's Cloud Workload Protection for Storage, or CWP. And similar to kind of things we've already talked about like Macy, it automatically discovers and scans S3 buckets and basically will go take all the files, scan them using their anti-malware technologies, and then you're able to tag them to say, hey, we've scanned this and it's all good. Snapper actually signed up for a free trial, and within a couple of hours they were able to turn this on and actually start scanning, protecting their S3 data. So no lengthy process to go through to get hold of the software. It was a pretty straightforward sub 1 day task for them. So, back to customer requirements, they had to scan all of the inbound and outbound content for malware before it could be processed. They have a contractual obligation to do that. They have to have the ability to tag the content, make sure that, there's nothing funny going on. And once everything had been scanned, they could go on and use it throughout the rest of the system there. What are we scanning here? So you might be thinking, well, what is this kind of student qualification? Well, sometimes it's just a list of students that are eligible. So there's some PII in there, but then you have to scan the documents for the student eligibility as well. So you've got a list, maybe some text files, but maybe some PDFs up to 100 meg in size as well. So CWP doing a great job there. The last one I want to talk about a little bit is probably one of the more cooler solutions we've got going in Marketplace, which is Watchtower AI. And basically, they kind of look at your data, figure out what type of data it is, and then how is it being used, and is it being used the right way? So this could be data stored not only in S3, but also in Redshift, RDS, or other places. And to give you an example of how they've used it, they were working with a security analytics company, Exabeam, who had a whole bunch of heterogeneous unstructured data in S3 that was unclassified. Now, obviously the first problem you've got when you're protecting data is, do I need to protect it, and how much do I need to protect it, and what's my obligations based on the type of data that's in there. So one of the challenges is obviously classifying that data. So with Watchtower, they were able to go through and have it automatically classify the data with a basically huge kind of success rate automatically. So no humans needed to go through and kind of work out whether this is PII or PCI. Watchtower AI can go do that. And it does this because it's got a set of pre-tuned standard detectors out of the box. So, it can find things like credit card numbers, emails, phone numbers, that kind of thing. It's also got automated workflows to kind of quarantine things, make sure it's aware of deletions and generating alerts, so you can be informed when something's going wrong there. So that leaves me with a couple of things left off to wrap up here. First of all of the products, Barracuda, Symantec, and Watchtower are all available in AWS Marketplace. So you might be thinking, why AWS Marketplace? Probably the first thing is everything you buy from Marketplace is going to appear on your AWS bill. The second thing, and this is kind of cool, is if you're into the space of buying WAFs or something like Symantec's cloud protection, they will all auto-scale up based on the load going through there. So, the more objects you're trying to scan your S3, the more Symantec instances that are going to be deployed. Rather than kind of paying a fixed cost for this, you're going to pay the way you pay for all of the other cloud assets by hourly. So if you're spinning up instances, you're going to pay an hourly rate. If you shut them down, the bill stops, which gives you incredible flexibility in your consumption model. As I mentioned, it's really easy to go deploy from Marketplace. It's usually a few clicks to get up and running. You accept the URL, and then you can go deploy pre-packaged AMIs into your environment and get up and running, usually within a few minutes. And then finally, we've got some humans that you can get in touch with to kind of give you guidance and help out with those things as well. And there's a great quote there. If it had not been for AWS Marketplace, it would have taken a couple of weeks before I'd even had the software installed on my side. And this is pretty typical, right? Not only do you have to get hold of the software, it's also finding someone to go install it, finding someone to make sure you've got all the right dependencies and network configuration, and all of this is done for you out of Marketplace. So how can you get started? Well, I strongly encourage you, first of all, go take a look at Security Hub, because you turn that on and start getting some visibility instantly within your accounts. The next thing is go check out some of these products from Marketplace. Barracuda, Symantec, and Watchtower all have 30-day free trials, so you can just go spin something up, plug it in your account, and then see if it's right for you. The last thing is quick summary. So make sure you understand what your data is in the cloud. Where is it? Who has access to it? Are you auditing the access? Are you looking for changes in the permissions and that kind of thing? That's fundamentally the first thing, is taking care of those humans. Next up, take a look at the AWS services that we've talked about today, Macy in particular, Security Hub, to kind of help you visualize and look at data within your environment and make sure you're compliant and spotting those vulnerabilities. Check out some of the tools in Marketplace. We've mentioned a couple today, Barracuda, Symantec, and Watchtower, and there's plenty more within Marketplace. In fact, security is probably our biggest category in there, and there's hundreds of vendors in there. So if you're looking for a particular tool and you already have something, go check out Marketplace. Find out if your existing tools are in there, because it's going to really streamline how you get onto AWS.